Steven Callahan finds himself enjoying a luxury when it comes to sailing. A peaceful week. The sea is gentle, and the wind seems helpful as it pushes the Napoleon Solo towards Antigua. The sea breeze rustles the pages of his novel, and the sun kisses his skin. His hair is bleached just a little more each day. In this downtime, he pens stories and letters, he doodles goofy pictures, and he exercises by doing yoga, push-ups, and pull-ups. His boat, as well as himself, are in great shape, and he's just having a fun time enjoying the cruise. He estimates that if everything goes well, then he should reach his destination by February 25th. On February 4th, the lazy sailing is gone as a gale sweeps in. Waves get larger and start crashing down on the Solo. The little boat races up the watery hills, which are quickly becoming mountains. The sky is dark, and the beautiful blue has become an ominous black. Despite all of that, Callahan has sailed in worse and isn't too uncomfortable. He pulls out the movie camera he has on board and has a bit of fun with it.
Gar, matey. As you can see, we's having just fine weather. Of course, we can do with a bit of wind.
At this point, Callahan has made at least one Atlantic crossing, so the worsening weather seemed to be well within acceptable tolerances. In about 2 weeks, he expects to be lazing around under a Caribbean sun with a rum punch in hand. Despite how the sea is behaving, the cabin remained relatively comfortable. He looks at the patterns in the wood grain of the interior of the boat and finds that the shapes of animals and people calm him. At approximately 22:30 GMT, the full moon sits above him and the ocean. At 2300, he changes into some casual wear in the form of exactly one t-shirt, a watch, and a whale-tooth necklace. He lays down, and after some time, a huge bang wakes him up. It sounds like an explosion. He can hear the wood fiber tearing and breaking apart, and even scarier, the sound of water's rushing in. He jumps up. There's water rushing in everywhere. It feels like a raging river is inside of his little boat. Where's the damn hole? No time to even care about it. The water's already waist deep, and the boat is starting to dip down in a scary direction. Damn it! She's sinking. Get the emergency duffel bag, he thinks to himself. Callahan dives down into the water that is rapidly increasing in his cabin and cuts loose his emergency duffel bag. His world is darkness, chaos, and rushing water. He comes up, throws open the hatch, and springs up onto the deck of the Napoleon Solo. Damn it! He left the duffel bag behind. It's been less than 30 seconds since the collision happened, and he immediately cuts the tie-downs that secure the emergency raft. Thoughts rush into Callahan's mind. Maybe he's just been testing his luck a bit too much lately. Maybe it really is time to die. He tries to pull open the emergency raft, and nothing. He tries a second time. Still nothing. Come on, you bastard! A third pull finally frees the raft, and it begins to inflate. In 1 minute, the Napoleon Solo went from seaworthy to a sinking wreck. Not even worth the consideration to entertain the idea of saving it. Callahan's too far from anything. There's no hope for rescue. The fear he experiences becomes the fuel he needs to quickly deal with the problems as they come up. Focus. Get moving. He knows he has canned water on the emergency raft, but without additional equipment, he doesn't imagine he'll last long. He tries to salvage everything he possibly can. Something to cover himself up. Anything. He cuts off a piece of the mainsail. He grabs a horseshoe life preserver and a man overboard pole. The smell of rubber and plastic fill Callahan's nose. He imagines the Solo will sink at any moment, but he needs to get more supplies. He goes back through the hatch and feels for the emergency duffel bag that he'd left behind. The bag was much heavier than expected. but he's able to get it aboard the emergency raft. He gets a floating cushion and his sleeping bag. With those things aboard the emergency raft, he has successfully abandoned ship. He grabs a few more things as they float out of the cabin. Those things are a cabbage, an empty coffee can, and a box containing some eggs. At some point, a huge wave hits the raft and momentarily collapses the tent-like structure of it. "I'm gonna die. Tonight," he thinks to himself. He'd be lost in a watery grave and no one would even know until weeks after it happened. This brings us back to where we left off at the start of part 1. We're now back to February 5th, day 1 of being lost at sea. Heads up, I'll be quickly going through the days lost at sea and bringing up mainly the days that are specifically mentioned in Steven Callahan's book, Adrift. I'll also be correcting my past self and just say that this will be a multi-part series. I'm going to try to get it done in 3, but it may be more. With that out of the way, let's get back to the story. Days at sea. February 5th, 1982, day 1. It's the morning of February 5th and the first day of Callahan's journey at sea. The Napoleon Solo is gone and out of sight, and the weather sort of cleared up. Callahan brought with him a piece of equipment called the Emergency Position Indicating Radio Beacon, or EPIRB for short. It's a device that has a range of 250 miles and a 72-hour battery life. The range decreases as the battery dies. Commercial airlines can see the device's signal and notify ships in the area of the situation. He doesn't believe anyone will see his signal, but he tries anyway. He knew of a trimaran named the Boat Life that had capsized and sunk. Their emergency life raft was destroyed, and the crew still managed to be saved because they held on to the EPIRB. Knowing that story boosts Callahan's morale because he'll be saved. He runs some basic calculations, and if things are steady, it could take 90 days for him to reach the Caribbean and easily over 100 if certain conditions are met. Don't think about it. 20 days. Someone will find me in 20 days, Callahan says to himself. He thinks about other famous cases of people being adrift. A lot of those cases, the people had more food and water at the start. But Callahan's well prepared and has fishing gear. The biggest worry he believes he has is that he doesn't have a replacement for his emergency raft. Any loss of equipment could be a death sentence. Without water, he can last a maximum of 10 days. If he loses his air pump, then the raft will deflate in the middle of the ocean. Even losing bits of plastic and paper could be detrimental. Those are potentially valuable materials. February 6, 1982, day 2. Callahan opens up a can of peanuts and takes his time enjoying each one. It's his 30th birthday, and he spends a bit of it writing his own epitaph. It says, Steven Callahan, February 6, 1952 to February 6, 1982. Dreamed, drew pictures, built boats, died. Once he writes it all down, he doesn't feel any comfort because being able to distill down his entire life into such few words makes his life feel inconsequential. During the day, the sun brings warmth, and the night, the sea gets a bit more vicious and cold. The water temperature dips below 65 degrees, so death via hypothermia is a real possibility. Naked, sore, and cold, Callahan finds himself shivering in a wet sleeping bag as he falls asleep to the sounds of waves breaking on the raft so hard that they sound like a cannon being fired. Since Callahan is constantly drenched with salt water, his skin develops hundreds of boils, cuts and scrapes over his lower spine, butt, and knees. They suck, but he hopes that they're clean and is constantly woken up by the sharp pain of salt water entering all the wounds. He discovers 2 small holes in the floor. He grabs the patching kit, which contains glue and raft material. He attempts to plug the holes, but the glue doesn't adhere to damp rubber, it needs to be dry. He spends the next 2 hours making a serviceable patch. The raft's equipment bag has 6 pints of water in tins with plastic lids, 2 short plywood paddles, 2 hand-launched parachute flares, 3 handheld red flares, 2 handheld orange smoke flares, 2 sponges, a folding radar reflector, 2 solar distillation units, also known as solar stills, 2 can openers, a first aid kit, a rubber collapsible basin, 100 feet of 1/8 inch polypropylene heavy line, survival charts, protractor, pencil, and eraser, a flashlight and 2 signal mirrors, a raft patching kit, and a simple fishing kit. This is just the stuff that was in the raft's equipment bag. It doesn't include the emergency duffel bag that Callahan managed to save before the boat sank. I won't go into everything that bag had because I don't want to just read a list to you. He's prepared, but not for an over 70-day excursion. At some point between day 2 and 3, he begins to keep notes of his health and the condition of the raft. He also keeps a ship's log and a rough navigational record. He only takes notes when he's positive the raft won't capsize or be flooded, so there are gaps in between when entries are made. February 8th, 1982, day 4. The winds begin to calm a bit, but he's still seeing 15-plus foot waves on a regular basis. Callahan determines that his chart of the Indian Ocean is useless for his current situation, so he crumples it up and floats it in the water behind him. He times how long it takes for the papers to move 70 feet. It's about 2 minutes. With that information, he's able to calculate that he's traveling approximately 8 miles a day on the water. If he's able to average 17 miles a day, then he can expect to reach the nearest shipping lanes in about 22 days. With the calculations made, he decides to opt for speed over stability, and he pulls up the sea anchor he made, and now the raft is moving at a speed of approximately 25 to 30 miles a day. He marks his 1-liter plastic water jug and begins to ration himself to half a pint of water per day, which translates into a mouthful of water every 6 hours. It's a bit tough restricting water intake to that degree, so he tries to get one of his 3 water stills up and running. In ideal situations, it should produce 2 pints of drinkable water from the ocean every single day. Pretty soon after he deploys it, it collapses. He tries a second still, and this one manages to stay inflated. After an hour, it has about 8 ounces of water. He takes a sip and is hit with the taste of salt. Ugh, it's damn seawater. He only has 6 pints of water left and estimates that that will last him 16 days. He starts to think about that unforgettable night. What the hell did he hit? He made it topside fairly quickly after impact. Surely he'd have seen any large debris in the water that was capable of causing that type of damage. He concludes that it had to have been something of the ocean, something big, like a whale. Oh well, doesn't do anyone any good to think about it now. Callahan sees a fin slice through the topwater, and he quickly reaches for one of his paddles. If he needed to hit the shark to get it to leave the raft alone, he was more than willing to do just that. When one fin disappears, another one takes its place. Except this fin didn't belong to a shark. It belonged to a bluefish. He quickly grabs his spear gun. The bluefish leaves, but even that is quickly replaced by dorados. These fish are 3 to 4 feet in length and weigh anywhere from 20 to 30 pounds. The pitching of the raft as well as surface refraction made spear hunting fairly difficult, so missing is a common thing right now. This is the start of Callahan's fantasies regarding food and water. Once again, he tries his hand at the solar stills. It ends up yielding half a pint. He opens his first can of fresh water, which leaves him with 5 or 15 days worth of fresh water. February 10th, 1982, day 6. On this day, the wind blew hard, and the repair he'd made to the floor had come up. Luckily, over time, he's able to seal it back up, and he manages to stab one of the Dorados with the spear gun, but it gets away. Suddenly, a shape appears and is quickly making its way in the direction of the raft. The creature's unmistakable once he sees the distinct hammer-shaped head. Callahan's heart races as he watches the shark glide just below the surface under his raft. It does a circle around him and disappears into the deep blue. At that moment, Callahan knew he'd never go for a swim, for any reason. February 15th, 1982, day 11. By the 11th day, Callahan is spending hours doing mental calculations of his chances for survival. His scabs get torn off every time he gets wet for extended periods of time, and the sun helps them dry out and heal bit by bit. He's at the point where he's almost constantly fantasizing about food. Callahan compares hunger to an inescapable witch. He finds himself looking at his can of beans regularly, but the can itself is blown, so the risk of contracting botulism is high. He ends up needing to force himself to throw the can overboard. Callahan sees himself as three distinct and separate things during this tribulation. There's the physical self, emotional self, and rational self. As his voyage gets longer and longer, he instinctively relies on his rational self more and more. The rational him is a bit of a cynic, and in his log he writes,
"The Dorados remain beautiful, alluring. I asked one to marry me, but her parents will not hear of it. I'm not colorful enough. Imagine, bigotry even here. However, they also point out that I do not have a very bright future. It's a reasonable objection."
So yeah, Callahan is having a pretty rough time mentally and physically at this point. He manages to spear a Dorado, but is unable to get it aboard the raft. He's hungry and thirsty. He says thirst is a curse that causes him to count the minutes between each sip he's allowed to take, and for the last 9 days he's only had a cup of water each morning. He continues to have problems with the solar stills, and it gets to the point where he decides to take one of the stills apart to learn how it works and troubleshoot the other two. Eventually he's able to get one of the stills up and running. He stares as the pure drops of water begin to collect. Hope has returned for a bit. February 17th, 1982, day 13. In 13 days he's only eaten 3 pounds of food. Callahan moves slower, gets tired faster, and his body has started to eat away at its own muscle. He finally manages to spear a triggerfish and get it on board. He kills it and begins to cry as he starts eating it. On this day, he also gets harassed by a school of Dorados. They ram their heads into the underside of his raft, basically hitting him in the back, legs, and ribs. He kills one and hauls it on board as well, but he says killing the Dorado sparked an anger in the school of fish. They continuously follow his raft and regularly ram him. One fish in particular is absolutely dedicated to attacking him. Callahan hypothesizes that the one that consistently attacks him was the mate of the Dorado he had speared. The meat doesn't taste as good as expected, but after letting it age for a day, he says the flavor completely transforms into something delicious. February 18th, 1982, day 14. Callahan is 1,000 miles away from any luxuries, but he says he feels like one of the wealthiest people in the world. He has 15 pounds of fish hanging up on a clothesline that he's rigged up on one side of the raft in an area he calls the butcher shop. He has food, he has a way to get fresh water, and he's slowly making a home out of this raft. He asks, who would ever look upon a lump of raw fish and a pint of fresh water as wealth? I have an answer for that personally. Anyone in a similar situation would see that as wealth. You could be a billionaire and all that money means nothing in the middle of the ocean, a place where Callahan has been stripped of all human wants. He only cares about what he needs. During the night of day 14, a shark attacks the Dorados under his raft and it rams into his back. Once it was done with the fish, it turns its attention towards Callahan. For the next hour, he fights off this shark in the darkness of the night. All the confidence he'd built up from the success at fishing has been completely dashed as he realized how fast everything can change. Callahan looks out at the horizon and sees a ship. He ends up shooting 6 flares that night, trying to get the attention of the ship. But, for whatever reason, they never notice him. He thought he'd been saved. He drank a pint of water, way more than his ration. He scolds himself for being wasteful as he comes to terms with what just happened. He watches the ship disappear from view. This concludes part 2 about Mr. Callahan's harrowing experience. Part 3 will be out at the same time next week, and I hope you tune in again to hear it. If you like the episode, then give the podcast a follow on whatever platform you're listening to it, and share it with your friends. It really helps. This is Myths, History, and D&D, and I hope you tune in next time.